In this lesson, we'll look at how to connect to the Azure Virtual Machines. In the last lesson, we discussed about how to create virtual machines. So I would say called as Azure Virtual Machines. Then we said that we need to have a subscription. Then we need to have a resource group. That we need to choose the location, nothing but the region, under which region you want to create the virtual machine. Then you need to choose the availability options, whether in which particular zone you want to create the virtual machine. Then VM image, that is nothing but OS image. So which operating system you really want to have inside the virtual machine. Then the VM size. So we need to provide a VM size. So how many processors and memory capacity you want it. And basically we choose what category, either a general purpose or a compute optimized or a memory optimized. Then based on that, we will basically going to create a virtual machine. So now the Azure Virtual Machine supports a Windows operating system. So Windows servers and as well as a desktop operating system. So we can install a Windows 11 operating system, Windows 10 operating system inside the Azure Virtual Machine, or Windows Server operating system like 2019 or anything. And it also supports various Linux flavors. So I would say called as like you have Red Hat, you have Ubuntu, you have like an SUSE called as an CentOS, like you have called as Oracle, etc. Like these things. There are many vendors who are providing these operating systems. And apart from that, we have called as a custom or a third-party provided images. These are basically with an OS, with an application installed. So there could be a Windows or basically a Linux operating system. So on top of that, an application has been already installed. So we can choose any one of these things during the deployment. Now, how do we going to interact with this Windows OS and Linux OS? Now, this is an Azure data center. This is an Azure, I would say an Azure, a region of which is called as the Central India. So when we create a virtual machine, so we are choosing a region called as in Central India, and we are creating a virtual machine. So this virtual machine is sitting on the Azure region and having a Windows operating system. So let's take a Windows Server operating system or some operating system which is sitting or basically installed in this particular VM. Now we want to perform some kind of an operations on the operating system. Now Microsoft is not responsible to manage the OS. The Microsoft is not responsible to install applications or do any kind of activities inside this particular VM. So he is basically responsible till the hypervisor layer. On top of that is providing a virtual machine which we need to manage it. So when we create a virtual machine as a default, the virtual machine will have a public IP address. The virtual machine will have a default public IP address and a private IP address. So what happens here is so first time when we create a virtual machine, the Azure is going to create a network automatically and with the private IP address series, and it attaches this particular virtual machine to one of the subnet. Now what happens in this case is so the Azure is going to have a NIC, a virtual NIC. So called as an NIC. So it is going to create a NIC for this virtual machine. Based on the VM size, it could be 1 gig Ethernet card or a 10 gig Ethernet card. And it connects to one of the a subnet in the virtual network and gets a private IP address, And this private IP address is affixed to this particular virtual machine. As long as this VM exists, this private IP address is automatically assigned to this virtual machine and reserved to this virtual machine. Now, similarly, again, now for this particular virtual machine, Azure is going to map a public IP. Going to map a public IP address to this private IP address. So what happens is going to map an public IP to this private IP address. So basically we use terminology called as NATing. Later we will understand it. So it is going to in the backend and is going to assign a public IP and NAT to this a private IP address. So a private IP address could be like a 10.5, or I would say 35. So let's assume that, okay, the Azure has assigned a private IP address called as a 10.10.10.35. Now, at the same time, Azure is going to create a public IP. So I'm giving it 212.24.35.56, and which gets assigned NATed to the private IP address. NATed to the private IP address. Now this is the public IP address, and this is a private IP address. So what makes the difference between a public IP address and private IP address? By using a private IP address, we cannot access the machine over the internet. I can access this virtual machine using a private IP address within the local area network or within the VPN or some kind of a connectivity which is secure connectivity established to this particular VM network. But we cannot use this a private IP address over the internet to access this virtual machine. Now we need a public IP address. So in order to access any resource, any virtual machine or anything over the internet, then we need a public IP address. So the Azure is going to automatically assign a public IP address and map to a private IP address in the backend. Now, by using this public IP address, we can interact with this virtual machine. We can access the applications. We can access the Windows operating system by using this public IP address. Now, this is my laptop. This is my laptop. Okay, and this is Azure Central India. Now I'm sitting in Hyderabad and working on that. Now I want to access this machine which is there in Central India. Now what happens here now? So this virtual machine is being connected to your internet. So I'm also connected to an internet. And the Azure virtual machine is also connected to the internet using the public IP address. By using this public IP address, we can reach the Azure virtual machine and the applications which are being installed inside of it. Now, So VC called as an RDP, remote desktop protocol, remote or desktop protocol. So normally, typically we use an RDP client to access the Windows machines, okay, remotely. So we can use a remote desktop client on my PC and provide the IP address, the public IP address, and I can connect to the Windows virtual machine. Windows virtual machine. So let's see that. So let's log into a portal. So let me log into the portal. So I delete the resource group yesterday because we can, as I'm in a trial, so we can save a lot of cost. So I'm going to resource groups, create a resource group. I'm giving a resource group name called as web apps. A region, I'm selecting a central India. Next, review and create it. Review and create it. Now we create a resource group. I'm going to the virtual machine, create Azure Virtual Machine. So select the subscription resource group. So if you have not created a resource group, so you can create a new resource group here, and you can provide the name. It will going to create a new resource group automatically. Okay, create a new, basically add automatically it adds, or you can create a new. So during the creation of a virtual machine, it will create a resource group first, then it create a virtual machine. Then give the virtual machine name. So I'm giving a web app 1 as the virtual machine name. And region Central India, I'm selecting availability options, zone 1. As we discussed yesterday, we can select all the 3 zones. So 3 virtual machines will be created in that case. So I'm selecting a Windows Server 2019 data center. So it's saying it is available as part of the free service eligible. So I'm selecting a spot because I can save some cost because this is only, so I'm saying delete it. Okay. And see all the sizes. So I'm saying, let me select it at least of 2 CPUs with 8 GB RAM because the Windows OS may be required at least as 2 CPUs with minimum of 4 GB RAM so that we can work on it. So I'm selecting a size of D2AS4, 2 CPUs with 8 GB RAM. Then user account, as we discussed yesterday, we cannot use an admin account. So if I provide an admin account, it says, okay, user cannot have a special characters. So these are all the special characters cannot have it. Usernames must not include reserved words. Reserved words are basically like an admin. Users must not include reserved words. Okay, or it doesn't support administrator or admin. So there are certain reservations. So I'm giving a user account called as an Azure user, and I set the password of minimum 8 characters and create. It says validations failed. What are these validations? It's currently not available in Central India. Please try another size. So the size which we selected is not available in Central India. So let's go to the, let me see, and review and create. Okay, still this is also not available. Let me go to the see all sizes. Then let's see that whether this is available. D2AS V4. Oops. I think as part of the spot instances, it may not be available. Let me go ahead and basically see a normal. Yeah. So as we see that the Microsoft is not providing that capacity in the spot discount, so it is not there. So I'm just saying create a virtual machine. Let's wait for a minute. It would take around 5 to 6 minutes to create a virtual machine. Yeah, so we have the virtual machine created. We can click on go to resorts to see the virtual machines, or we can go to the virtual machines and we can see the virtual machine name. So click on this virtual machine name to get the details about the virtual machine. And still the agent is not ready. So we have to wait until this agent gets ready. It means that all the services are going to run inside the virtual machine. So we have to wait until the agent is ready. So that indicates that so the OS has come up. And we can see a public IP address. So just take the public IP. Let's wait for these things. So go to the remote desktop client. And you can specify the public IP, whatever you've been copied, and say connect. So I'm trying to connect to this machine locally. So from my local PC, I'm trying to connect. Now it's asking me the username and password. Now I'm giving Azure user, the user account which I gave during the deployment of the virtual machine, and the password, whatever we gave during the deployment of the virtual machine. And say yes. Now we have this Windows virtual machine running in Azure. Let's wait till it gets loaded. Okay. As it has been powered on, it would take a couple of minutes to get into speed. So I go to the File Explorer. So we see an OS disk, C drive, temporary storage. So which is of 126 GB size. This sometimes vary based on the OS image which you select or VM size which you select. Temporary storage, as I said, whenever a VM is being powered on, Azure is going to create a temporary disk and going to attach the temporary disk. So we should not store any data into this one. It is very clear that a data loss warning read message is saying this is a temporary disk. Any data stored in this drive is subject to loss and there is no way to recover it. Please do not use this disk for any storing any personal or application data. Okay, so we have to be very clear that we should not use this drive. This drive is being created by Azure for using as a virtual memory purpose. Okay, so if there is underlying physical memory issue, then it is going to use this virtual memory from this particular storage. Let's just for the sake of your purpose, So I'm creating a folder called as a test, basically stop. Now we can perform all the activities like the on-prem virtual machine. Now there is no difference now. So it is the same virtual machine which is running in Azure, and it is the same virtual machine running in your on-prem, because both are running the Windows operating system. So however we manage an on-prem virtual machine, same way we can manage the Azure virtual machine operating system. So we can install the applications. Yeah, there are certain applications which does not support, like DSCP application we cannot install, okay, in Azure virtual machines. But the most of the, I would say 98% of the applications are supported in Azure virtual machines and Azure features of it. Now I'm just signing out. I'm going to the virtual machine and I'm stopping it. Let's wait until the status comes into stopped. Yeah, now we can see stop deallocated. I'm selecting the virtual machine. I'm starting this virtual machine. Just click on the VM. Let's wait for 3-4 minutes to come up. So I'm taking the public IP. It's asking the password. I'm giving. Now I logged into the Windows virtual machine. So I go to the temporary disk. We see the folder which we created is not available now. The folder which we created is not available now, because it's a temporary disk. As I said, whenever a VM is being shut down, any data which is available, anything which is there in the D drive will be lost. We should not store it. Later we will see that how we can add the disk to a virtual machine. But this is how you can connect to the an Azure Windows virtual machine. Now let's look at Linux VM. Linux VM. So a virtual machine which is installed with some Ubuntu or some SUSE or CentOS Linux. So when we create a virtual machine, Linux virtual machine, it also has a NIC card. That NIC will have a private IP address assigned, and a public IP address is being assigned to this virtual machine, mapped to a private IP address, that is NATed to a private IP address. NATed to a private IP address. Now, during the creation of a Linux VM, so it has two things. One is an username bar password. Username bar key pair. Now, during the creation of a Linux VM, it asks us, do you want to create a Linux VM with username and password or username and key pair? Now, there are two ways to authenticate with Linux VM. One is an username and password. One is a username and key pair. So key pair is nothing but a kind of an SSL certificate which can be used to authenticate with Linux VM. To authenticate with Linux VM. Now, username and password. So we can use username and password. So by default, we know that the root is the default user account in Linux. So we cannot provide a root username. So it is a reserved word. So it doesn't. So we have to create our own user account. Now, in Linux, we use called as an SSH. It's called as a secure shell. Secure shell. Like in Windows, we have RDP. In Linux, we have SSH. So this application will listen on a port number 22. Now we use called as an SSH client to interact with the Linux operating system. Now we can use the public IP, and we can use any one of these methods to authenticate with the Linux VM, and we can access the Linux VM. So now I'm going to use both the methods we'll show. So I'm going to stop this virtual machine. Let's go to the virtual machines. Let's create a virtual machine. So I'm going to create a Linux VM. So I'm going to select the resource group. I'm saying Ubuntu VM1. I'm selecting availability zone, Central India. So I'm selecting Ubuntu Linux. Now down we can see authentication type. You want to use an SSH public key or password. For the now, I'm using a password. I'm giving it username as Azure Linux user. I'm setting a password. So I'm creating a Linux VM with a user account called as an Azure Linux user. Let me copy this somewhere. Linux user and the password, and review and create. Basic information is missing. Okay, I think we can select, we didn't select the, there is a bug over there. Create. So while this VM is getting create, we'll create another VM. So we can create a number of virtual machines. I'm creating Azure Virtual Machine again. I'm selecting a resource group called as a web apps. I'm giving Ubuntu Linux VM2. I'm selecting Central India. Availability zone. So I'm selecting Ubuntu server. And now I can see authentication type as SSH public key. The username, I'm giving Azure Linux user. Now we can see SSH public keys to generate a new key pair. If key pair is not available, So you can it'll create a new one. We can use the same key pair for multiple virtual machines. So we don't need to generate in a key pair for every virtual machine. So we can generate once and we can use the same key pair to create new virtual machines. As this is the first time we are creating one, I'm saying generate a new key pair and the name of the key pair name is this one. So during the creation, it'll ask us to save this key pair. We'll see that. Now I'm just clicking review and create. So as it's saying exceeding the local quota, let me select South India. No, it is not available. So we'll select something which is there in the South India. Create it. But saying generate a new key pair, download a private key and create a resource. Okay. So you have to download it. If you forget to do that, then you will not be able to authenticate. And we have to keep this key pair file in a safe place so that it doesn't go into the unauthorized users. If someone gets access to this particular file, they can connect to your Linux machine and they can basically do anything. So you have to secure that particular private key file. Right. So while this is creating, let's go to the virtual machines. Now we have Ubuntu VN1, a VM, so which is in running state. Now this we created using SSH password, using the username and password. So let me take the IP. Now how do we do that? So we need an SSH client. We need an SSH client. So I'm going to the and download a PuTTY client. PuTTY download. PuTTY is basically a small client application which can be used to connect to the Linux machines using SSH protocol. Yeah. So let me go to this download folder and I see PuTTY. Let me put it on the desktop. So now I use a PuTTY client. So let's take the public IP, open the PuTTY. So we see SSH. So select SSH and enter the IP address of this machine. I'm just changing the system color and the font, the color, appearance. I want to change the font to 14 so that I'm saying open. Now accept this secure key. Now it is asking me username. I'm giving username as Azure Linux user, the user which we gave Azure Linux user. Okay, the username which we gave during the deployment of Linux VM. Now it is asking you for your password because we selected a password. Now enter the password. Now we see that we are able to log into the Azure Linux virtual machine over the internet using a public IP using SSH. And this is a normal user on Linux. So you cannot execute all the commands and you cannot perform all the commands. But if you want to do that, you have to use a sudo elevated privileges to do that. So this is how you can connect to the Linux virtual machine, which has a username and password using the PuTTY client. Now let's look at another virtual machine, which we created using the key pair. So we can authenticate using the key pair. So I'm taking the public IP. Now before, yeah, let's take this public IP. So I'm going to the putty, give the IP address, SSH. Now we need to authenticate. So go to the putty, connection details, SSH, authentication, expand. Then we can see called as in credentials. Then it's asking you private key file for authentication. So go to the browse, go to the downloads folder. And it's looking for a PPK file, but we got an PEM file. So the putty cannot basically understand that it needs an PPK file. So I'm saying open, accept. I'm saying Azure user. We can see it's giving no support authentication methods available because the Azure has given a PEM file where the putty is not compatible with the PEM file. Now what we need to do is then convert the PEM key pair file to PPK file. How do we do that? We use a tool called as an putty gen. There is a tool called as a putty gen. So we just need to convert that. So let me go to the one and let me download a putty gen. Putty gen and download. Oh, this is something malware. Go to the download page. Yeah. Let's download the 64-bit. So double click on that and install the now we can see putty gen. It's called as a putty gen. Now open the putty gen. Okay. Now open the PPM file. You can click on load and select the PEM file. So first open the putty gen, then click on load. Then you select the PEM file, which you did. Now you click on save private key. Save private key. Now it saves in the PPK format. Now I'm giving Ubuntu Linux VM PPK file in the downloads, or let me save it on the desktop. Now, so just save it. So now you converted the PEM file into PPK format. Now let's open the putty. Let's provide the public IP of the virtual machine. Go to the SSH authentication, credentials, browse, and Ubuntu Linux VM. So open. It's going to ask you the username. Enter Azure Linux user. Now we see that it doesn't prompt you for password. It doesn't prompt you for a password. Let me change the color and settings so that it'll be easy. Now I see I connected to a Linux virtual machine using a key pair. So the key pair allows you to connect to Linux virtual machine without the password. That's the advantage, but there is a disadvantage. If someone gets access to this particular file, he can basically connect to the Linux VM. So we have to secure this file safely with a limited users. Okay. Now I'm just closing this. I'm going to this one. Let me go to the virtual machines. So let me delete all the virtual machines. Better always you keep deleting that so that you can save cost. You can have the credits given by Microsoft so that you have the credits to practice everything. Now I'm creating a new virtual machine, Azure Virtual Machine. I'm selecting a resource group. I'm giving Ubuntu Linux VM3, a Central India. Then Ubuntu server. So I'm selecting two CPUs. Let me go to the and another one. I'm not sure whether this is available. Now authentication type public key. We already have a key pair. So I select here use an existing key stored in Azure. And you see called as a Linux VM. Now you don't need to create a key pair for every virtual machine. You create once and use the same key to create other virtual machines. I'm creating this virtual machine using the existing key. So create. Let's wait for this. Yeah, now we have the VM created. Let me go to the virtual machines, Linux VM3, and we see a public IP. Let me take the public IP. We already have a PPK file, the key pair file. So I don't need to regenerate it. Go to this one and auth credentials. Select the key pair, PK file which we created, then open, accept, then select the username as Linux user. I think I gave the username as Azure user, public IP. Let me change font. Let me go to the SSH. The username should match. Now it's asking me the username. I'm giving it Azure user. I'm not sure. Okay. What is the user we give? Linux VM3. We give. Go to the connect. Yeah, it is Azure user is the username and public IP is this one. Let's try again. Okay, I typed the username wrong. Sorry, guys. Let me import it. Sometimes. So go to SSH, go to authentication, credentials. Select the PK file. Run it. Azure user. Yeah. Now we can see that it is connected to the Azure Linux virtual machine using the existing key pair. Okay. So once you convert that PM file into PPK file, so you can use that PKIP file. Now you can share this file with your colleagues and they can also connect to this Linux machine using this PPK file. Now, so that's how you can connect to the Windows virtual machines and Linux virtual machines and access these over the internet. So in the next lesson, we'll understand about the how do we manage the Azure virtual machines.